What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, I'm going to talk about wildcarding in Game Week 4. So I've got a few different drafts to show you. The first one is Salah and Haaland, and then I've got Salah only and then Haaland only as well. And I'm going to talk you through the best wildcard team according to the AI over on Fantasy Football Hub. And if you want to sign up to use all of their tools to help you do better at FPL, there is 50% off at the moment. And if you sign up and don't win your mini league, you will get your money back. Terms and conditions apply. All the links you need are in the description below. So I'm going to start with the Salah and the Haaland draft because I feel like most people wildcarding this week will be looking to build a squad with both of them in their team. And I've got the whole team on screen straight away because there's a few other drafts that I want to talk about afterwards as well. So it's a 4-4-2 formation. Most weeks it's going to be 3-5-2. But for Game Week 4, I've got Mbeumo on the bench against Man City away. Don't get too hung up on that. If you built this squad and wanted to play him, you absolutely could. But if you're ever going to bench him, it's for that kind of fixture. But after Game Week 4, it gets really good for Brentford attackers. They've got Spurs away in 5, which I wouldn't mind playing him in. And then from Game Week 6 onwards, everyone is going to be looking to get Mbeumo in their team, either with a free transfer or a wild card. Because it's West Ham at home, Wolves at home, Man United away, Ipswich at home, Fulham away, Bournemouth at home, Everton away, Leicester at home. The list is great. He always plays. His open play stats are great. He's on penalties as well. Once he's in your team, as long as he doesn't get injured, you just leave him there for like 10, 12 weeks. Like he's just a great pick. So I would definitely have him in my team if I was wildcarding this week. In goal, I've gone for Fabianski and Flecken. Now, Fabianski is not a guaranteed starter, but Areola did go off injured in Game Week 3. Now, we've got the international break. There's time to recover. But it's kind of perfect if Fabianski does play in Game Week 4 because you get Fulham away instead of Flecken with City away. But as I've just discussed, Brentford's fixtures are great long-term. And Flecken probably does look like the best 4.5 million long-term keeper. If you wanted to restructure this, and there's a few picks you just don't like, you're going to downgrade them, then of course you could go for like a Martinez at Aston Villa or a Raya at Arsenal. There's other options. But for 4.5, I quite like that Fabianski and Flecken combination. In Game Week 5, it is kind of tricky because I think Fabianski's got Chelsea at home. And then, obviously, for Flecken, it's Spurs away. But it's just 1 week where there's maybe not the greatest fixture. Like, if Fabianski is still playing, you probably just play him home to Chelsea. If not, you just play Flecken in one bad fixture. Like, no goalkeeper has a great run for, like, 20 weeks in a row. So I think it's fine, that combination. In defence, I've gone for Robertson for the million less than Trent. And it's not that Trent has all of a sudden become a bad pick. But if you want to fit Haaland and Salah in, you've got to make sacrifices. And it's really difficult to have Trent in there as well. And Robertson is clearly first choice at the moment and has been obviously for a long time and is playing well. So I actually really like the Robertson pick for 6 million rather than 7 million for Trent. And then I've got 4.5 million defenders. Now, Mykolenko on the bench is actually only 4.4, but it's close enough. And I know that looks like a really weird pick right now, right? And I fully get it. It's just a long-term fixtures play and the hope that Everton will get better. If you didn't want to include Mykolenko, you could go for a Rico Lewis punt. He's not in any of the drafts that I'm going to talk about. I think he probably will start against Brentford. I think the real test of whether he's going to stay in that 11 is whether he plays against Arsenal in Game Week 5. But I think given the way this squad is set up, it's quite solid in terms of the picks there. You're not going to have to worry about most of them. So you could take a punt on Rico Lewis, and I fully get why you would want to do that. But Everton's long-term fixtures are not bad. Like in Game Week 6, it's Palace at home. 7 is Newcastle at home. 8 is Ipswich away. You got Fulham at home in 9. Southampton away in 10. It's Brentford at home in 12. Wolves at home in 14. There's plenty of times over the next kind of 10 or so weeks where you could maybe use Mykolenko and just hope that Everton can get back to being a little bit more defensively solid. That will probably happen with Branthwaite's return as well. So he's not a major pick in this squad, but that's why I have him on the bench. And then the other 4.5s are Konza, Dunk and Robinson, who are all absolutely nailed. Robinson's fairly attacking, got 2 assists the last 2 game weeks, a couple of good fixtures coming up. Lewis Dunk is really a fixtures play for the next 2 in particular. So you got Ipswich at home and then I think it's Forest at home. Let me just check here. Yeah, back-to-back home games. And then even like later on, you know, you got Wolves at home in 9. Longer term, you got Southampton at home in 13. There are other game weeks where they would be useful. And after game week 4, you're playing a 3-5-2 most weeks anyway. So Robertson would always play. And then you've only got to pick 2 of the others. And also the reason that Robertson is there is like a placeholder for Arsenal defenders in game week 6. because I think in game week 6 you're really going to want 2 or 3 Arsenal players, and in this squad I've only got 1. But the beauty, I think, just going back to Liverpool for a second, and this is going to be a bit of a ramble, I think. If you got to game week 6 or 7 and like disaster had happened with your squad and you had loads of transfers to use on other players, okay, it's not ideal not being able to get an Arsenal defender in game week 6, but if you had to play Robertson against Wolves away and Palace away, it wouldn't be the end of the world. So that's why I really like him as a pick. And then Cons is just nailed on for Aston Villa. They got some pretty good fixtures coming up. I don't think there's too many 4.5s that I'm missing, like Crystal Palace defender, maybe. Obviously, they got Leicester at home this week. You could go for a Brentford defender and double up with Flecken, but I'm not sure many people are going to want to do that. Obviously, Rico Lewis I just spoke about. If you want to take the risk, I don't mind it, right? Because he's such a good player if he keeps playing. I think that's about it. Like Van de Ven obviously was injured in game week 3. Maybe you could pick a Spurs defender, but I think that is a pretty solid set of 4.5s. Then the midfield is Salah, Saka, Eze, and Minter, with obviously Mbeumo on the bench I've already spoken about. I think the 5.5 million midfielders are interesting because a lot of us have gone for Smith Rowe. Semenyo cannot stop getting attacking returns. He may actually be the better long-term pick. But again, I look at Brighton's fixtures right in front of us. Ipswich at home, Forest at home. It's not that... sorry, I was going to say it's not that bad. It's pretty decent. And then Chelsea away and Spurs at home straight afterwards is actually probably fine for an attacker. And Wolves at home in 9 is okay as well. So I feel like Minter long-term might not be quite as good as Semenyo. But if you got stuck with him in game week 6 and 7, it's really not the end of the world. Chelsea away and Spurs at home. So I really like him as a pick, and I'm pretty sure I would include him if I was wildcarding this week. Eze would be an absolute lock for me. I know it took him a few game weeks to get going, but like Mbeumo, absolutely nailed on, always gets the minutes. There's no Europe to worry about either. They're on penalties. They're just such good value picks for their price. And obviously Eze has dropped as well. He's down to 6.9, so you don't even have to pay 7 million for him anymore. I've got Saka. I think most people would have Palmer. There's 2 reasons why I don't have Cole Palmer. And I do think for the next 2 game weeks, he's better than Saka. One is I've only got 0.3 million in the bank. And I found it quite hard to decide where to save the money. The most obvious one would be Mykolenko to a 4 million defender. And then I could do Saka to Palmer. But I know I will want Saka in game week 6. So it's just saving a transfer. And I actually thought about this when I was making this video. The 5 transfers thing is actually quite interesting in that how you build a wildcard squad will probably depend on how many free transfers you've got. So if you're going into game week 4 and you've rolled every single week, but you just want a refresh, you want to get Salah and Haaland in your team, but you've got 3 free transfers, you're probably more likely to go for Palmer. Because when you get to game week 6, you'll probably have 4 or 5 free transfers, right? And so you've got the moves to do Palmer to Saka. It's very unlikely you're going to have so many issues where you can't make that transfer. But for me, I've only got 1 free transfer. So if I wildcard this week, by the time I get to game week 6, I'll only have 2. And so if I already want to do Robertson to an Arsenal defender, do I also want to force Palmer to Saka? And that's just to get 2 Arsenal players in. And then I've got no free transfers left for anything else. So how many free transfers you've got will probably actually dictate how you build your squad. It's only going to be minor differences, but it is worth thinking about. So that's why I've got Saka. Also, I look at the next 2 fixtures for Saka and Palmer. And Palmer has Bournemouth away, I think it is this week, and West Ham away, which is better than Spurs away and Man City away. I think Saka against Spurs is absolutely fine. So it's really only the Man City game in game week 5. I think I'd rather just save the transfer. And like you could look at 6 and 7 for Palmer and say Brighton at home and Forest at home is great, which it is. But Saka's literally got 2 home games against newly promoted sides, Leicester at home and Southampton at home. So for my team, I would probably start with Saka. But if you've got more free transfers and more money to spend with the structure you come up with, Palmer probably is the better option for 2, and then you switch him. And obviously Salah's in because it's a Salah and Haaland draft, and then Haaland's in as well, with João Pedro up front. And on the bench, I've got Stewart, who's a non-4.5 million playing forward. But that's just to get everyone else that I want in this squad. Obviously, you could restructure things, right? Mbeumo or Eze could go down to a Rodgers. That would let you do Stewart up to a playing forward. But I quite like how that looks. The only... I still think when I wildcard in 6, my intention is to wildcard with Haaland and not Salah. And I know that sounds crazy given how well Salah has done, but I still think one or the other is going to be the way forward long term. But I just think on wildcard 4, it kind of makes sense to have both. Because if you look at the fixtures long term, and this is why I say I might not go with Salah on wildcard 6, like I'm going to captain Haaland. Like in Game Week 6, I'm going to captain Saka, right? Leicester at home. Game Week 7, definitely Haaland, Fulham at home. Game Week 8, he's got Wolves away, and Salah has, let me just check here, Chelsea at home. I'd probably captain Haaland, although Chelsea at home is not that bad of a fixture for Liverpool. Southampton at home, I'm definitely captaining Haaland. And then the fixtures after that are just pretty good, whereas for Salah, they get a little bit trickier. Like it's Arsenal away in 9. I mean, to be fair, like now I'm looking at it, like Brighton at home, Villa at home, Southampton is actually pretty decent. So maybe you just would want Salah, and maybe I'm talking rubbish, and on wildcard 6, I will go for both. From making this video, I'm quite tempted to wildcard this week because I think that looks really solid. There's just not enough changes from my team, I think, to do it. I'm going to talk about that tomorrow. But yeah, I think that looks really good. And I guess long term, if you do want to get some funds elsewhere, you just sell one of Haaland or Salah, right? And then you've got money to burn. The only thing is that then takes a lot of transfers to redistribute it around the squad. But then who would you really need to get? Like the one thing this squad doesn't have is like an Isak or a Watkins or a Havertz, but there's so much value in midfield. I don't know if that matters. I really don't. And then it's just defenders, like more premium defenders. So maybe you can just build a Salah and Haaland squad this week, roll for a couple of weeks, get your Arsenal defender in, and then just see where it takes you. I still can't get out of my head that one or the other is the better move. But if I was wildcarding this week and putting something like this together, I think it looks pretty damn good. So this next draft is Salah only. There's no room for Erling Haaland. And I think before Game Week 3 happened, this is the type of draft that I had in mind for Game Week 4. But after back-to-back hat-tricks, it feels crazy to go without Haaland. But I still want to talk through this draft anyway, just in case anyone wants to go for Salah only. So up front, instead of Haaland, it's Ollie Watkins. I think this draft relies heavily on him finding some form and starting to get some more minutes. Because if you look at what's happened so far, it's 1 assist in the first 3 games, which came against Leicester in Game Week 3. He's played 61, 64 and 60 minutes. I expected after the Arsenal game for his minutes to go up, but actually they came down. He played the least amount of minutes against Leicester, which is not ideal in Game Week 3. And the fact that Duran keeps coming off the bench and scoring also gives Unai Emery an option off the bench if Watkins isn't playing well, or if he doesn't feel like he can play any more minutes than that. Now, after the international break, I do expect Ollie Watkins' minutes to go up. I think it would be weird for him to continue coming off around the 60th minute. But compared to previous seasons, they might drop overall because of Champions League. So I think they'll go up from 60, but they might come down from the 90 we've come to expect, especially if Duran keeps playing well. So this draft does heavily rely on him doing well. He's got the fixtures to do it. He's got the quality we've seen plenty of times before to not match Haaland, right? I'm not expecting that, but to do enough to warrant going without him at least for a few weeks. But I will say, based on what we've seen in the first 3 game weeks, Haaland smashing 7 goals and Watkins getting 1 assist, it doesn't feel great. I think this draft might have looked a lot better in pre-season for Game Week 4 than it does right now. Instead of Minter in midfield, you've got Cole Palmer. So that's a pretty big upgrade. I think if I was going without Haaland, I would definitely want a midfield of Salah, Palmer, Saka, Eze and Mbeumo. That just looks like the midfield 5 for me right now. That could change. There's other, good value players like Smith Rowe, Minter, Semenyo, for example. Maybe Bruno Fernandes will find his feet eventually. Odegaard at Arsenal too for their fixtures from Game Week 6 onwards. But that midfield 5 for me in a no Haaland draft, it basically picks itself. And I would figure out everything else around it. So that's the midfield I've got. In defence, instead of Mikalenko, it's Virgil van Dijk, which is a nice upgrade. You've got double Liverpool defence for the next couple of fixtures. Then you can move them on to Arsenal defenders if you want to. And also, instead of Robinson, I've gone for Greaves on the bench, for a 4 million defender. So it's not just upgrades everywhere. I've had to make a little bit of a sacrifice on the bench just to be able to have Van Dijk. The one problem with how I've built this draft is there's not a smooth route back to Haaland. It would basically take 3 transfers because you can't do Watkins to Haaland and like Palmer out to a midfield. Like, I'd only have 4.7 in the bank, so I'd have to go for like a Winks. But really, I'd want to go to like Rodgers. So then I'd have to find another 0.3 somewhere else. So not only am I starting without Haaland, the way I've built it with my budget, I'd have to use 3 transfers to get him in. And I think I would definitely want him from game week 7. Like, could you get away with no Haaland the next 3 game weeks? Possibly. It'd be scary against Brentford at home, but you could captain Salah against Nottingham Forest at home. In game week 5, when Haaland plays Arsenal at home, that will be tricky. Could he score? Yes. Is that going to be a brace or a hat-trick? Unlikely, I would say. Arsenal defence is so good. So that week's not a problem. Newcastle away, I mean, he's just scored a hat-trick against West Ham away. There's no reason he can't do it against Newcastle. But Saka against Leicester at home is a good captain. And I know people would have done that in game week 3 and they've been burnt by it now. But it doesn't mean it's going to happen again. But game week 7, you're going to want him. I just don't know if it's worth 3 transfers to get him in. So either you need to just start with him, or you need to set up your squad in a better way than I have, where you can just get him in 2 moves. You want to be able to do, I think, Palmer and Watkins to Haaland and Rodgers at a minimum, bearing in mind that their prices could go up as well. But, on the other hand, I love that midfield 5. I think it's brilliant. You got 5 penalty-taking midfielders that play pretty much 90 minutes every single game. There's so much value in that midfield. It looks great. And look, maybe you could do Watkins to a Havertz, or Watkins to a cheap forward and upgrade Stewart. And you could go that route. But that might leave it even harder to get Haaland in. So I think this draft looked good before Haaland scored his second hat-trick. Let me know if you're brave enough to go Salah only now. And this third draft is Haaland only. Now, the thing that sticks out massively is I've got no Liverpool attack for Forest at home and Bournemouth at home, which doesn't feel ideal. Now, I could consider the likes of Diaz or Jota, who haven't featured in any of the drafts I've spoken about so far, but I'm just not sure I would put them in. Like, they could be brilliant for the next 2 weeks, but then I know I'm going to want to take them out. Like, Eze and Mbeumo are the 2 players in this draft that are closest to those Liverpool attackers' price. I think long-term, they're just better options. Like, if we look at what's happened so far, right, with Luis Diaz, he played 90 minutes in game week 1, then it was 71 in game week 2, and then 65 against Man United. Now, to be fair, the Man United game was won. There was no issue with substituting him early, but they've got an alternative in Gakpo that can play. And then for Jota, he's played 78, 71, and 75. They've got an alternative in Darwin Núñez. And Gakpo and Darwin are going to continue to build up their minutes. The early substitutions are going to keep happening. And at some point, one of, if not both, of Diaz and Jota could get benched. I just know I'm not going to want them long term. I don't have those concerns with the likes of Eze and Mbeumo who start every game and they take penalties. And I know it's boring, right? I get it. But sometimes boring works in FPL. And you could look at it and say, well, hang on. Mbeumo, you only really want him from game week 6 onwards, which is fair. So you could start with a Liverpool attacker instead and then make that transfer. But I've already got one pre-book to do Robertson to an Arsenal defender. Do I really want to pre-book another one? The other problem is, for my budget, and your budget might be different, right? So you might be able to do this easier. If I wanted to do Mbeumo out to, let's just say Diaz, because he's the one that scored most recently, I'd have to find 0.2 million from somewhere. So not only am I pre-booking a transfer for a player I know I will definitely want in game week 6, and I don't want to get rid of Eze because he plays Leicester at home this week, I've then got to make another downgrade somewhere else. I just don't think it's worth it. So if I was building a Haaland-only draft, I would probably just hope that I get away with that Liverpool attack and just go from there. I mean, in a Haaland and Salah draft, I'm only getting one Liverpool attacker. I'm still ignoring Jota and Diaz. So there's no harm in doing it here either. Elsewhere, goalkeepers the same as they have been in all drafts. Defence is Robertson with Porro on the bench and Greaves, and then Duncan Cons are the 4.5s. Midfield is Eze and Mbeumo, who I've spoken about. Minter as well as the value option. You can change him to a different 5.5 later on if you wanted to. And then Saka and Palmer. And I think that would be the midfield. Like, I'm really only looking at about 6 or 7 options on wildcard and midfield. It primarily revolves around Eze and Mbeumo, Saka, and then Palmer, Salah, and maybe Minter. Like, in fact, I'm only really looking at 6 players at the moment. And then up front, actually, the interesting change from the other 2 drafts is I've got an 8th attacker. In the first 2 I showed you, I had Stewart on the bench, a 4.5 million non-playing forward. In this one, I've got Haaland, João Pedro, who continues to get good minutes, by the way, and then Calvert-Lewin. Now, it doesn't have to be Calvert-Lewin. It could be Menez or Visser instead if you wanted to. But Everton's fixtures are actually pretty good, as I spoke about with Mikalenko. So Villa away this week, Leicester away in 5, Palace at home in 6, Newcastle at home in 7, Ipswich away in 8, Fulham at home in 9, Southampton away in 10. The fixtures are just good for Villa. Let me get my words out properly. The fixtures are good for Everton for quite a while. And I know we see Calvert-Lewin as this injury-prone player, and he hasn't had a great time over the last few seasons, but he did start 26 times last year. It's not like they've got Europe or anything like that. If he can stay fit and keep firing, as he did against Bournemouth, then he could be a decent FPL option. But it could just be someone else, right? It could be Vissa, Muniz. Either way, you've got an 8th attacker. So when Mbeumo comes in, you could just keep playing Calvert-Lewin and maybe bench Minter when Brighton's fixtures get a little bit tougher. So I actually really like this draft, apart from the no Liverpool problem. And I still think from Game Week 6, this is the kind of thing that I would build. But I just think Game Week 4 is tricky to wildcard because going without Haaland is tough, as we've discussed already. And it seems mad to go without Liverpool players when they've got such good fixtures right in front of them. So I almost feel like in Game Week 4, you've probably got to go for both. And maybe in Game Week 6 onwards, that's when you look at going for one, and it would probably be Haaland. Let's see what the AI says. So this is the best wildcard team according to the AI over on Fantasy Football Hub, and it has gone with Salah only rather than Salah and Haaland, although that might change over the international break as things like minutes and points projections get tweaked and stuff like that. It's quite similar to the draft that I spoke about with a few changes, right? So in goal, it's Fabianski on the bench rather than playing in Game Week 4. And Martinez is the main goalkeeper. Now, that's purely going to be because of the fixtures right in front of Aston Villa. They got back-to-back home games against Everton and Wolves, whereas Flecken obviously has 2 away games against City and Spurs. So long-term is a good option, but it's also nice to get the points straight away. So I like the Martinez pick, although I think if Fabianski is going to play in Game Week 4, I quite like the option of just spending a little bit less on the goalkeeper position. To get the Liverpool points from the next few fixtures, it's Robertson and Trent. Again, I haven't included Trent in any of the drafts that I spoke about. And then obviously Salah captain as well. So that's your triple Liverpool. They've got Vardio in defence. I actually don't mind him because he's continuing to start and the City defence is great. But if Rico Lewis keeps playing, Vardio's not going to be as attacking because he's basically going to form a back 3. So he's not going to be like that left winger. So I probably wouldn't go for Vardio. And I think because the bench is so cheap on this draft, they've got Harwood, Bellis, Greaves and Stewart, I would get rid of Vardio to a cheaper defender and beef that defence up a little bit. I just don't think you can go that cheap. Alongside Salah, it's Eze, Saka, Palmer and Semenyo as the 5.5. Long term, I think Semenyo is great, but I do like the fixtures that Minter has got right in front of him for Brighton. So that is probably where I would go. But actually, interestingly, when I checked my suggested transfers on Hub, after I'd already got rid of Nkunku, they suggested doing Nkunku to Semenyo, who just scored in Game Week 3. So maybe I should have listened to that. And I do really like him long term. Then it's Isak and João Pedro up front. I think Isak's okay, but again, downgrading Vardio lets you get Watkins. I think Watkins' minutes will go up. If you think Watkins is going to continue to get subbed early, then Isak is still a good option. But honestly, I watched Newcastle second half against Spurs. They weren't great. Like Wolves away, Fulham away is decent enough. I'm not sure I would include Isak on wildcard. But, like I said, I went against Nkunku to Semenyo. I went Smith Rowe instead, and now I'm down on points. So what do I know? If you want to check out that tool on the My Team tool on Fantasy Football Hub, plus all the others they have, there are links in the description below. If you've enjoyed that video, make sure to give it a like and hit that subscribe button. If you're wildcarding this week, let me know in the comments below. Is it Haaland and Salah, or are you brave enough to just drop one of them? And if you're listening on podcasts, rate 5 stars and leave a review. It all helps. Thanks very much for watching. I'll catch you again tomorrow for another video.